The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below. Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor, Thomas Goss. I'll be releasing the long-delayed final chapter of my Symphonie Fantastique score analysis videos this weekend, but I thought you'd enjoy a preview today. Here's my favorite page from that lecture. This page might look a bit intimidating, and in a way it is. You can easily break down the components of this massive tutti passage and see how each one relates to the other. But the interdependencies take a bit more explaining, and work together in ways you might not expect from listening to it without the score. Even starting with the melodic elements takes extra work here, because it's not just any finale wind-up. Rather, it's a gruesome madcap rewrite of the Idée fixe theme from the first movement. What's more, some instruments play roles of harmonizing with the melody and then slipping easily in and out of unison. But let's start with the middle, with the alto trombone. As I've mentioned previously in this series of lectures, the alto often stood in for the role of leader of the brass section back in the era of natural trumpets and horns. Here, Berlioz's scheme of E-flat trumpets and horns works against their upper registers to play what would be easy to cover for natural brass in C. So the alto trombone gets to shine on the melody. Not only that, the tenor trombones play along in a chorale with the alto, but not always in close harmonization. Often the harmony spreads out for a much fuller sound. Right on top of the trombones, the bassoons cover the melody in a close harmony all the way through, but the exact melody winds its way through the repeated back and forth thirds, instead of always following the exact arc like the trombones. Of course, the trombones will be so loud here, even against a quartet of bassoons doubling each pitch, that it doesn't really matter so much. Other than a couple of bars of C basso horn supporting the tenor trombones toward the end, there's no other mid-range melodic function. So let's jump up a whole 2 octaves to the simple statement by piccolo and flute. Notice the accents on the 3rd and 6th beat of each bar that really give the melody a punchy quality. Before we bother with the rest of the wind section, let's see what the upper strings are doing. Notice that the first violins are playing a few stretched out triple stops, stacks of 6, which are pretty easy to fit under the fingers, and E octaves. Those D octave triple stops towards the end are also easy to manage. The player just moves their finger position down a whole step and adds the open D string. What's a little trickier are the triple stops for second violins with a lot of shifting positions, not to mention hit and miss parallel motion. But seasoned section players can manage this with no problem. The violas have far easier double and triple stops below, with every chord but one including open strings. When you put all these string groups and their alternating chords together, you get the outline of the melody, heavily harmonized. And then, when you add the strings to the flutes, the energy becomes overwhelming. As to the rest of the upper winds, the clarinets play a very similar role to the bassoons, with the melody intertwining through the harmonized part, while the oboes fill in the space between clarinets and flutes. harmonizing with both and often spreading out to octaves. When you add all the thematic material together, including the harmonization, upper and lower parts, you get a mighty blast of melody. As to the accompaniment, we might as well start with the most exciting element, the double timpani going back and forth between C thirds and G thirds. Even completely soloed out in these mock-ups, you can see that the idea of constant harmony in the timpani is less than ideal. Berlioz might have gotten a great deal more clarity here with just the second timpanist's part, even with the 2 stations of timpani on either side of the stage. All the same, it's terrifically energetic to have both sets playing at once. Notice how the first player drops out every 4 bars when the harmony goes to a C diminished chord, and then both sets drop out on the 3rd and 6th beats towards the end so as to emphasize the strong beats, as well as staying out of the way of some chords. To help emphasize this, let's add the first ophicleide part to the next mock-up, in its function as the only full realization of the bass line here. Meanwhile, the lower strings are mostly just hitting 1s and 5s, Cs and Gs, plus forming a bit of harmony on the 5s toward the end. As with most huge Berlioz tutis, the basses are kept up, in this case completely within the range of the cellos, and the cellos even higher. Meanwhile, the natural horns repeat C chords over and over, with the E-flat trumpets hammering away at sounding Gs, with a few E-flats thrown in on the diminished chords. Towards the end, the horns add a little harmonization to the theme, and the cornets add a few sounding E6ths just for fun. Putting the whole accompaniment together with the timpani, you get something like this. Or with full orchestra in a real performance. Not every screen in the full video has this kind of breakdown, but it's interesting how easy it is to pick out different elements with the whole orchestra playing after you've heard and seen them individually, isn't it? The rest of my 47-minute lecture is filled with hands-on explanations of each page of the Symphonie Fantastique's towering coda section, exploring each instrument and section's function, how Berlioz builds up his massive textures even when he's limited to obsolete instruments, and how some of those unbelievable tutti chords are put together. Sometimes just understanding the harmony of one chord explains the entire page, especially in a symphonic finale. I hope you'll join me for that this weekend, when I release the final video in my Symphonie Fantastique series. See you then.